I try to pick the pieces in my mind, put them in a pretty little line for you to see. I try.
Hello everyone, I'm Joe Collins and this is Dear DM, a Dungeons & Dragons advice podcast where each episode I sit down with a different dungeon master in order to discuss, debate, and hopefully answer your D&D related questions. Thank you so much for joining me here on our third episode at Dear DM. I know last episode ran a little bit long, though that was mostly because Adam and I had so much fun rambling on about your questions together. But from here on out, I'm going to try and make a concerted effort to keep our episodes a little bit more manageable in length. But as always, if you want to hear your question discussed on the show, please shoot a tweet at our Twitter account at DearDMPodcast or send us an email at deardm.submit@gmail.com. The more questions you guys send in, the more content we can make for you guys at home, and the happier I'll be. So, with all of that taken care of, it's time to get started answering some of those questions. As always, I have a special guest with me here to help answer your Dungeons & Dragons related quandaries, and this week I am very excited to welcome B, one of the DMs from the Normal Mode YouTube channel. Welcome to the show, B.
Thanks so much for the invite. It's always good, and I've actually been waiting a long time. I'm excited.
Yeah, it's good we can get this going. I'm excited to get some questions answered, get some fun D&D discussion going. I'm glad to have you on the show. So why don't we start by having you tell folks at home a little bit about the D&D game you guys have going over at Normal Mode.
Okay, so we've been playing D&D for a while, and we have a huge community that sometimes gets up to like 11, 12 people. Right now, we're doing a homebrew campaign that, due to popular demand, was centered around Homestuck, which is apparently my crew really likes it. So that's what we're doing. It's intense. It's heavily political, has a lot of intrigue, double-crossing. Each player has their own motives, and they tend to butt heads quite often.
That's awesome. And so I imagine as a DM, it's sometimes a challenge to keep the balance between it just descending into chaos and having the interpersonal conflict. But you guys manage it pretty well. And so what's your personal history as being a DM? I know you've been doing it for a long time, but what's kind of the rundown of your personal DM experience?
Oh, well, 14 years ago, I was 11 years old. My uncle introduced me to a few of the Wizards of the Coast gaming platforms. Tabletop gaming was amazing to me. It was like, wow, this is all of my favorite games. Pretty much I can do whatever I want. There are no railroads, no storyline that has to be forced, no terrible, god-awful conveniences for plot to be brought forth. It was just a really good platform for creation and creative people.
Absolutely, I 100% agree. So you started when you were 11, you said? Was when you started playing? When
when I started playing.
When did you start DMing for your friends or for folks that you knew?
Well, I mean, I think my first DMing was god-awful. I do want to put that out there. But it was probably like 14 or 15. I think that was my my first time at the podium with everybody looking to me for instructions.
That's awesome, though. Like, that's still pretty young, and I mean, that's gonna happen. Nobody's good at being a DM the first time in. As long as you're getting started, that's a good thing. But so you want to just dive right in, start answering some questions?
Absolutely, let's do it.
Awesome. Starting off, we got a question that I believe is going to be very pertinent because it's something you have to deal with on a regular basis. But we have a question from one sassy succubus who asks, they say, I'm not a DM, but I've wanted to help mine since we have a very large party and I imagine it's frustrating. How do you make every member of a large group feel like they're individually impactful, unique, and their personal stories are still being given attention to?
Yes, so there are a couple of things that I do to combat being drowned out in such a large group. Number one, if you've ever read Lord of the Flies, they have a conch shell that they use. When the conch shell is held, that person can speak. In times where there is a lot of volumes or altered opinions going on, hand out the conch, metaphorically if you need to, and just go around the table, get everybody's ideas, summarize them, keep them short, Everybody has to be respectable, no monologues, and that'll help everybody speak. Other than that, as a DM, I created 8 plot hooks for this Homestuck game that I would have to incorporate in my story that brings all of the main characters' personal inner conflicts to light over the course of the story, and that helps them all be pertinent at some point.
Okay, so it's a combination. In your case, you use a combination of the method of having a structured rule for, okay, we're all going to have our turn to discuss this or do our thing, but then also just planning in advance the campaign to set it up so you have an idea of how to get everyone's star moment, their moment in the spotlight out there. You plan ahead for that.
Yeah, and the trick for that star moment is don't make it exact, make it vague. Just make an idea or a scenario, and then you can pretty much slide that anywhere, especially like that one moment where it clicks and just fits into place.
Oh yeah, because I mean, especially if the players give you any amount of backstory to slip into a quest or an NPC they might have known, or even just an area of expertise, then you can always use those as. Because it doesn't need to be like an episode-by-episode thing. You don't need to have, all right, this session is about Tim. Tim's character is getting to be important this episode. Everyone take a back seat, and then it'll be your turn next time. It can literally be, all right, this is your moment for this session that you get to be super badass. It doesn't need to be like a giant monologue or anything for each instance.
I've found that short and concise often leaves some of the most memorable moments.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. I'll agree with that. That's a good way to do it. The one thing that I've done before is as unholy and unforgiving as it is to split the party, as long as you plan for it and as long as it's done well, you can always split the group into different parts of the session. So you can say, all right, you guys show up at 6, we'll go for 2 hours, and then the rest of the group show up at 8, we'll do it for 2 hours. But that way, if you got a really large group, it's a way to kind of divide and conquer and get some individual time with them without having to have the rest of the party just wait for them to be done. I've done that once or twice, and it worked out pretty well. But ideally, you want to keep the party together, but in times of need, it can be done.
I agree.
Awesome. So our next question is one that is pertinent to a lot of folks who don't have too much experience with it, but also just in general is kind of a case-by-case basis. But Aesel wanted to know, what are the pros and cons of alcohol and or cannabis at the table?
Oh, all right. So I'll say this. Our group isn't too heavily skewed one way or the other. We do alcohol sometimes, just kind of depends on the night. We don't really do cannabis all that much just because it's pretty heavy stink, And for those who are uncomfortable with that, nobody would ever want to put them in an environment where they, were embarrassed or uncertain. So we tend to do just alcohol.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, no, that's always a good way to go. Like, because especially concerning specifically cannabis, I've found that when you do have folks smoking at the table, I mean, it can be fun, but it's very, very, very easy for them to get to the point where it's difficult to pay attention and even be engaged at all. In comparison to like with alcohol, it's a much easier to moderate and much easier to still be engaged while maybe loosening up a little bit. But as for the question about pros and cons, I would definitely say, in my personal opinion, there's more cons than pros of being intoxicated at the table. The only major pro I would say is that, especially if you have, not to endorse, drinking if people are uncomfortable, but like, if someone's, I know I personally am a lot better at opening up and talking to people and role playing if I've had just a little bit of alcohol to kind of loosen up the nerves, and especially with a new group, it is called social lubricant for a reason. Plus, who doesn't want to be a little bit drunk when they're playing their drunken dwarf? Yeah,
I mean, if you're a drunken master, go for it, so long as you're still somewhat in control, because they are masters.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but that's something that's come up once or twice. I think at this point we're good to move on to our fun little game that we do in the middle of the episode, which is our character generation segment. So as we've been doing the last couple of weeks, we have this little bit in the middle where I have made some random character tables. We have tables for race, profession, background, and a character quirk. And B, do you have any D20s readily available?
Yes, I do. Let me grab one from my dice bag. Give me just a moment.
Awesome. And what we're going to do is we're going to roll up a random character. Well, we're actually going to roll up 3, but then at the end we're going to choose our personal favorite of the characters we make, try and make something weird or funny or cool. And then you guys take that idea and run with it, either writing something, drawing something, whatever it inspires you to do. I know Travis Mattingly killed it again last episode. He did fan art for the first one and did fan art again for the second one, and it was just made me so happy. Go ahead and check it out on Twitter. It is wonderful. Because last episode I believe was the nudist Kanku hermit. But yeah, so are we ready to get some rolls going?
I am ready to go.
Awesome. So let's do the first roll, which is for race.
Okay, I got a 3.
That's elf. Next would be profession.
14.
That's gonna be artist.
An artist elf.
That seems reasonable. And then next is gonna be background.
17.
17 is archaeologist. Okay, so they're both, so maybe like an art history major.
Yeah. Or
elf.
even like they're responsible for drawing like historical items or events.
Yeah, some of that effect, some sort of it belongs in a museum type elf.
Yeah, I recognize that. You know.
But so, and then the last one is their character quirk.
2.
Refuses to stop and ask for directions at all, ever. That I like this character. This is much more an NPC than a PC, I think. But
yeah,
I love
I can just imagine, Sire, I'm pretty sure it was blue. Shut up.
I think we might have missed the tomb a couple miles back. No, I'm pretty sure it's further up there. We'll be fine. But yeah, no.
I also imagine it being while he's drawing, like he refuses to stop and double check like his work.
Just constantly screwing up and refusing to acknowledge it. That's wonderful.
Mm-hmm. What a historian.
Indeed. So let's do 2 more real quick. Let's do another set of rolls. First is race again.
Okay, let's get to it. It looks like a 1.
That's human. That's the natural 1 on the race. And then profession?
14.
14 is artist again, so let's re-roll that.
Let's re-roll it. Okay, I got a 9 this time around.
9 is cleric. Okay, we got a human cleric.
19.
19 is investigator. So maybe almost kind of an inquisitor type character.
It could be an investigator who talks to the dead.
Okay, we're getting into some interesting territory then. We got a Ghostbuster / Gumshoe type character.
Yeah, Yu Yu Hakusho.
That's awesome. All right, and then let's mess the character up with a character quirk.
16.
16 is affectionate towards farm animals.
Oh my.
So yeah, he's just a little average everyday detective who speaks to dead but also really likes farm animals. Just as a fun side thing.
For our third?
Our third, let's do some more rolls.
11 for the first.
That's Genasi.
Oh, so a Genasi 4.
4 is Ranger. Okay.
A Genasi Ranger 17.
Is archaeologist.
Again, we'll re-roll that, right?
Yeah, we'll re-roll that as well.
7.
Guild merchant. Okay.
A Genasi Ranger Guild merchant. We're getting something here. This is pretty stable.
We're getting something.
For that character quirk, we got an 18.
18 is makes fun of opponents by mimicking them.
Okay. Huh.
I think that one's kind of all over the place. It doesn't really congeal into anything. So I think, unless I'm mistaken, we want to choose from the other 2, probably.
Yeah, I think so too.
I'm personally a fan of the elf artist archaeologist who doesn't follow directions under any circumstances.
Okay, so if it wasn't for the love for farm animals, if it was something different, I would totally go for the investigator that talks to the dead to figure out, what happened at the scene. But I got to go with the elf with this one just because he sounds like a very irritating and irresponsible NPC.
Which is always the most fun to play. Lord knows, I love having. I've had a recurring character who wasn't an elf, but it has shown up in several games that I've run, who is a savant, very intelligent young man who is a mage at a mage college or something to that effect, and he has the most annoying nasally little kid voice of all time and is the biggest prick, but it's just so much fun to play, and I feel like this elf would be in the same realm.
Yeah, definitely. I can feel that.
Yeah. But yeah, so we're going with the elf. So you folks at home know what to do. If you're inspired to do any a bio or a short story or any fan art, we'd love to see it. Send it to us at on Twitter at DearDMPodcast or on Gmail at deardm.submit@gmail.com. And I'll love to go through those. I'm very excited to see what comes of it. I love this little fun little game we have going in the middle, but I think it's time to jump back into some questions. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right, sweet. This next one comes from Dilogy, who asks, how does one go about creating your own world for the first time? Do you go from a general statement and history and narrow it down and fit your players into that setting? Or do you start with the specific setting you want for your players and then expand to the general gradually from there? It's a bit overwhelming doing this before your first session even begins, and I'm concerned that my players will ask specifics about the world before I finish fleshing it all out. Should I do this whole process before session 0, or should I develop it on the fly as the game goes along?
So, this is a really good question. First off, when you are creating a brand new homebrew world for a session, a lot of newer or first-time, world-creating DMs, world-building DMs, they do too much. Oftentimes, all you need to do is establish what your players are going to be exploring, and then build out over time. If they ask you a question, you have an option to where you can make it up right then and there. DM's world building. Do not feel like you have to create every part of your story. The main thing is you create what the characters perceive. Anything over that hill or horizon is yours to make over time when you need it. You can create a world, just a blank world, and then smoosh dungeons wherever you might need to have them at the time. Just create a basic map and then fill it in from there.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that, because Lord knows I did the opposite. When I first ran my first campaign, I spent a ridiculous amount of time making a map and countries and political structures and filling out the whole world, and then lo and behold, we start the game, and I realize, oh yeah, we're only dealing with like 1/100th of what I prepared. But that's not to say that it's not fun to do and it's not a good idea if you can do it. But when you're first starting out, I always recommend just starting with the starting town. Have a starting town and an outlying area around it that they'll explore. For a starting group, that is all you need. And any questions that they ask about the greater world, that is now your artistic license to make up as you go. The one thing I would recommend personally is always keeping a notebook. I mean, you should always do that anyways as a DM, but always keep a notebook so that as soon as you bullshit something, you can write it down and have that be consistent so you don't forget it later. So when you say, oh yeah, there's this order of ancient elves and their names are this and blah, 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 you actually remember that next time they ask, what were the ancient elves about? So... that'd be the one thing I add is that you should definitely, whenever you come up with something, as you make it up on the go, you want to then cement it so that it feels like it's part of the world and not something you made up.
Yeah, I agree there. That's long story short from my perspective is don't overburden yourself. As soon as you get done with the campaign, you can go to your map and add that new city that you randomly made up, just right then and there.
Absolutely. Plus, I mean, a lot of the times you got to remember where they're getting their information from. A lot of the times we kind of assume that if they get like as players, they kind of assume that if they get information from an NPC, it's gospel about the world, but the characters in the world are fallible. They could be wrong about something. They could say, oh yeah, those ruins over there were made by the dwarves or something, or blah blah. But the actual history could be something entirely different that nobody knows. You can kind of be fluid that way as well. So yeah, I think it kind of lends itself to making it up as you go rather than having to figure out all the histories to whatever you're trying to figure out, unless it's pertinent to the story. Yeah. All right, and I think our last question for today is going to be a slightly simple one, but I think that is interesting. And was asked by Bonicle4 on Twitter. And they ask, what are your tips for creating original character names? And actually, I'll extend this to just creating names in general as a DM. How do you go about that?
Okay, so there are actually a few ways to do this. Number one is never shy away from using real names as a basis. For example, you could say Johnson. Well, Johnson's a pretty common name. You could, of course, just change like one phonetic syllable of that, like Janssen, or so on and so forth, and suddenly that's a little unique, you know? It can easily be a human town in like a Western continent, farmer's village, you get the idea. Other than that, taking ideas, concepts, so on and so forth from the real world and applying them to names is always acceptable, because in this day and age, to whatever your setting could be, they could very well use ideas as bases. An example is hallow. It's typically a somewhat like negatively perceived word. You could say Hallowfell, and hey, that could be a last name right there.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's part of it's just the fact of I feel like a lot of times I find myself falling into the habit of giving a lot of noun adjective last names, especially to dwarves. Like dwarves, I always end up calling them like Han Firebeard or Stonebreaker or some noun-verb kind of combination I always end up doing for dwarves, but it works. And a lot of the times that makes them, it can be a descriptor of their character, it can be memorable, but you just want to make sure that it's not every character is first name, noun, verb. But yeah, I will say, and I don't know whether this is sacrilege or not, but I have gotten a lot of mileage out of fantasynamegenerators.com.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
It's so useful, and I always feel a little bit guilty because I'm like, oh, I could do this if I just took the time, but there's a lot of things on there that it's just so brilliant for just being able to spitball names, or even once you find a name that sounds interesting, you can then change it from there too.
So I have a guilty pleasure in the random generator section myself. It's an NPC generator. I use it all the time. I'm gonna pull it up real quick. It's so I don't know if this is appropriate, totally just like throwing them out over there, but I just searched up D&D NPC generators quite a while back, and I got the azurewebsites.net one. Oh, it is so good. The names are a little bit off, but like it includes ability scores, plot hooks, sexual orientations, and relationship stati. It has the alignment grid, so they have points into every alignment part. So this one, for example, has good 4, neutral 3, evil 3, lawful 0, neutral 2, chaotic 9. So they have a very hard leaning to be chaotic of pretty much any of the varieties. They would be a chaotic neutral. It's a very, very cool character generator, because just the alignment tendencies in themselves give me so many ideas on how a character can interact with the world around them.
And that also is a great tool for even like, because Lord, you obviously like another mistake I made early on as a DM was I made the starting town, and every single person in the town had a name and a quirk and a purpose, and everything like was all set out. But I find that one of the best things you can do is have an NPC either generator or, just tables or backup ideas for them. because even if the character's literally the street urchin or the peasant that they've run into to ask for directions, if that character has a motivation they don't know about from a randomly generated table, all of a sudden their encounter, even if they don't realize why, feels a lot more real. The character, since the person they're talking to has actually a motive, which they wouldn't have if they were just, Johann the merchant, but they might have if they're Johann the merchant who also actually has a gambling debt and is very suspicious of everyone. It can genuinely make more interesting random characters and make the world feel more real with that kind of a generator. But yeah, for the tips for naming things, absolutely, character name generators or using real life names. I've even gotten away, if you have a group that you know that you're playing with, you can always steal. You can always steal names from other material. You can always, because Lord knows, I've got a group that I actually just started last night. It's the first time in a little while I've been playing with an in real life group rather than a Roll20 group. And one of those questions in an early campaign came up where it's like, oh, what's the capital of this nation called? And I hadn't figured it out yet. I'm like, it's called Praven. Let's go with Praven, which they were like, oh yeah, that's a neat name for a place. I'm like, that is the name from Mountain Blade Warband, the video game I was playing the other day. But they don't know, so it works. So yeah.
That's pretty funny.
And that goes with all things, in my opinion, is as DMs, if you can get away with it, steal material. It's how you get better. It's how you get more stuff under your belt. And no one will ever know for the most part.
There was actually a really good piece of advice that I got from Matt Colville on that. It was, if you borrow from stuff that's too new, you're too derivative. So go after the stuff that everybody's forgotten or that nobody has heard of. If you're borrowing stuff, that's always a really good way to do it.
Yeah, because that's a good, because especially things like a bunch of adventures and content for the earlier editions of D&D, even like some of the content for like 3.5 at this point, I would consider forgotten enough to steal directly from, because so many of the folks playing now are like, we've got a ton of people who have only ever experienced the 5e material. So there's a bunch of stuff you can go back and just use. Not to mention, you can never go wrong with, as a starting DM, you can have your own homebrew adventure set in Faerun, set in an established setting. So you already have these places and names set up. You don't have to worry about naming everything. But you can then create your own events around those locations and change it as you like. But yeah, I think that about covers names in general. I think that's gonna just about do it for us here. Before we go, I wanted to remind everyone that we want your questions and your submissions as much as possible so we can keep making more and more content for you guys. You can submit your questions or fan art or anything you like. Well, not anything, but most things to either our Twitter @DearDMPodcast or to our Gmail, deardm.submit@gmail.com. And before we go, B, why don't you tell some folks where they can find Normal Mode, all your social media stuff, where they can look you guys up?
Oh, yeah, so we are just Normal Motors. You can actually find us on YouTube. Do /C/Normal Motors. We should be there. We just do, video game stuff. We do a D&D stream when we have time, but in the more recent months, we've been buckling down just to focus on the end of our story. So right now, we're not doing as much D&D stuff, but we'll be there if you want to see us.
Awesome. And as always, I want to thank my dear friend Paul Parisa for the use of his song Whether or Not as the opening and closing music for the show. He's extremely talented, and I've had the pleasure of playing with him a lot, and I love him, and so go check out his music. He's brilliant. And before we go, also, I'm going to ask you, B, on the spot, we want to end the show with a game tale. So what's one of your favorite memories or stories or anecdotes from one of the games that you've run or played in?
One of my favorite memories was... there was this moment where the party discovered that at the end of their journey, at the end of everything, there was a throne, and on that throne was an imprisoned child who had served upon that throne for millennia. And at the moment, every single party member has a different want around that throne. Some of them want to find a way to destroy it and free the imprisoned king. Others want to sit upon it and recreate the world at their whim. And watching them all focus on this and argue over this and consider over this has been a magical moment, kind of heartbreaking in some ways, because there are those who want to save him by taking his place, for example. It's beautiful. It's really nice to see other people's humanity shine in a role-playing game.
That's awesome. I do love moments like that, and it's just wonderful. And it's always gratifying as a DM to know you set something like that up.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's going to do it for us here on Dear DM today. Thank you so much, B, for joining me.
I am very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And we'll see you all in 2 weeks at the next Tuesday, which I believe the next episode is going up on the 29th of January 2018. So we'll see you all then.
Have a good one, guys.
Bye.